Good evening, everyone. Just about. Thank you for endurance, patience, and all the rest. My name is Councillor Paul Follows. I'm leader of the council and the chairman of the executive. Louise, could I have apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies received from Councillor Palmer.
Many thanks indeed. Members, could I have your approval to agree the minutes of the 5th of July and the 18th of July published on the website?
Great.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, Louise.
None received before the meeting, Chairman.
Any further declarations from the floor? No, seeing none. Questions from the public?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. On to leader and portfolio holders updates. So my apologies for the delay. My faith in public transport remains unwavering despite how long it's taken to get a small distance across the country. I imagine we are likely to be on a light flood footing in the morning based on the weather and other things going on right now. So we'll have to address that when we start. There's only a couple of things I'm going to say right now. One is to offer congratulations to the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, Liz Truss, once a Liberal Democrat Republican. I think a senior member of my own party mentioned that we've now activated the sleeper, so we'll see how that's gone. In all seriousness, no. In all seriousness, no, I do wish her the best. It's obviously a tough job, and I'm very much hoping that we see some significant, dramatic and immediate changes in a number of positions that the government has held for the last 2 or 3 years, in particular on the cost of living and the energy crisis. So let's very much hope that we will see that turnabout. And that the very small number of people who managed to take part in that election, a group of people that is only slightly larger than the population of Waverley, have made a good choice. But we will, I'm sure, all wait and see. On the cost of living, our first cost of living working group meets on the 15th of September, where we are going to start assessing the impacts to residents, the impacts upon our tenants, the impacts upon our council, and the impacts upon our staff and contractors to see what we can possibly do using the levers that we have accessible to us to try and do something. One of the reasons that we need to do that is because of the continued lack of any government action or direction on the subject. Let us hope that starts to change. On that note, I shall go around the rest of the executive, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to say a few words about the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. Early last month, we kicked off the first public consultation of the FIP, where all Farnham residents are given the opportunity to have their say on some proposals for Farnham's town centre. The proposals include the widening of pavements in Downing Street and Castle Street, as well as changing the traffic flows in some roads that are currently one-way, and they will become two-way. This will prevent vehicles having to circulate unnecessarily around the town to reach their destination. There will also be the opportunity to have a look at ways to improve the A31 corridor that runs through Farnham, with improvements to the Coxbridge and Shepherd and Flock roundabouts, as well as 3 different options for the notorious Hickley's Corner, which will also provide improved connectivity between South Farnham and North Farnham, as well as the town centre. A leaflet has been circulated to all households with the full details of the consultation. This activity has been supported by the Farnham Herald, which has given the local members of the Farnham Board space in the paper each week to provide articles on various topics. The consultation has its own website where comments are made. However, printed documents are available from the Farnham Town Council building. In addition, there has been a series of public exhibitions that were held last month at the Farnham Maltings, the Bush Hotel and the Farnham Leisure Centre. So far, the consultation has received 367 responses, and it will now run until Sunday, the 2nd of October, having been extended. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I'll just report on Brightwells this time. And the main thing to say, unfortunately, is that, as people probably already aware, Marks and Spencers have withdrawn from the Brightwells scheme as the anchor retail tenant. We unfortunately weren't advised of this possibility by either Crest or Surrey, who are investing in the commercial part of the scheme for 2 or 3 weeks. But when we were eventually told, we were told by Crest that the reason was that M&S had changed their strategy, that they no longer want to have food stores in the centre of towns. They want to have them on the edge of towns with larger free car parks. And we did check on this. I checked on this myself, and it is true that M&S have changed the strategy. But M&S objected to Crest blaming them entirely and issued a statement to say it was mainly or considerably due to delays caused by Crest and the development of the scheme. So there we are. So we're now in the situation where Crest now have to look for a new anchor tenant or new anchor tenants. And no doubt this will cause a little bit of delay in the scheme. But nevertheless, we as Waverley will continue to support the scheme and as far as we possibly can. The scheme is almost 90% built now, and most of it will be ready for occupation sometime early next year. So we will continue to support Crest and Surrey and as far as we can in trying to make this scheme successful. That's all I want to say at the moment, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. They might want to reflect on the use of the word anchor tenant going forward, I think, as well, after this number of years. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Leader. We did have our councillors meeting on EDI, which was very interesting because everybody who was there, it was an informal meeting. There were no minutes taken, and everybody felt free to say exactly what they thought and did, in fact. So it was a very nice, interesting meeting, and we were hoping to repeat the experience sometime during this next term up until Christmas. The other meeting that we've recently done, the Corporate Equality Group met last week, and as part of its remit, it was looking at the Equality Objectives Action Plan, and I think I can report that that one of the things that was noted was that there is an action that can be taken if you feel harassed, if you're not a councillor, but there is no such mechanism in place if you are. So that is one thing perhaps that can go forward from that corporate equality group, that there is a point of single point of contact, or you can report it via a group. If you're not a councillor, but if you are a councillor, there isn't, the report it function is not available, as it were. So perhaps that's something we can sort of look at for next time. There were other things, but I will report at greater length at the Town Council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. And yes, it was a very enlightening and informative discussion amongst councillors, that meeting. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. In February, I noted that in addition to our routine financial reporting of the council's performance against budget, we'd also be monitoring emerging macroeconomic issues as they develop and update members during the year on their impact on our medium-term financial plan. That work has been in progress since, and the update will be forthcoming shortly. But I wanted quickly now to preview at least some of the themes that are coming through. Firstly, while our own energy costs appear to be heading toward at least a threefold increase this year, we're threatened by other even more severe potential cost pressures. Our largest single cost is our payroll, where we're already seeing evidence that staff are looking elsewhere for the additional salary uplift that the private sector can offer. It's anticipated that if the public sector continues to fall behind inflation-linked pay rises, this skills gap will increase, resulting in increased spend in terms of agency staff and or resourcing gaps. Our next largest cost base is our contractors, who provide basic services like waste and recycling, who face their own pressures, which may in turn also affect us. Second, these pressures not only apply to our recurring operating cost base, but also to our one-off and capital project costs, where we also face non-financial supply chain issues that are impacting the timing as well as the cost of delivering our projects. They also apply equally both to our general fund and to our housing revenue account at a time when we expect demand for our services to increase. Finally, as we know, even prior to COVID, let alone the current inflation crisis, our income from centrally controlled grants and retained business rates were already either zero or on that trajectory. Our ability to increase council tax and source independent income was similarly restricted at the centre, and yet now it seems possible that central government may try to force even more of the buck down onto us as part of its own cost of living interventions. In the meantime, the uncertainty caused by the governmental vacuum in Westminster has been spectacularly wretched, and we can only pray for better sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Well, the strong rumours are that Mr. Rees-Mogg will be the business secretary, so I'm sure we'll be having some very interesting policies coming down the pipe very soon. Councillor Miradees is next.
Thank you, Leader. I'll be talking about the Museum of Fundament application later, but that's all I'm going to be talking about today. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Very briefly, a little piece of good news. We always like a little piece of, we like a large amount of good news normally. I can say that the rebuilding of the Vernon Court wall has started this week and should be completed by November. It fell down some years ago because of heavy rain. But that's still the good news. Thank you, Leader.
Yes, let's see how that goes. Councillor Townsend. Friend of Thames Water, I might add.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, less said about that, the better at the moment. Well, today we had the last hearing day for Local Plan Part 2, and I would like to thank Waverley officers for all of their hard work. They've been working tirelessly to answer the inspector's comments and to also provide comments on modifications that were suggested. So this is the last day now, and we will await for the further instructions and comments from the inspector. Hasn't been an easy task to unravel the situation we were left with. However, giving up was not an option for us, and we've worked really hard to get to this stage after being left with the delayed remnants of the Local Plan Part 2 in 2019. So I very much look forward to moving to the next stage. I'd also like to take this opportunity to highlight the huge challenges faced by Waverley's businesses at this time. Having faced the impact on their businesses from the pandemic and Brexit, they are now facing escalating inflation and eye-watering energy costs, with some increases of around 400% being quoted. Businesses cannot face this challenge alone. I would like to join the Leader in congratulating the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and would stress the need for her government to outline immediately what support will be forthcoming to businesses and residents alike. And this must be delivered without further delay. We are doing what we can here in Waverley with the very small economic development team that we have. They are quickly disseminating whatever information they can and providing critical business support, as well as debt and financial support services too. However, we do not have the levers that government has access to, and the council cannot provide financial support through grants or the ability to cut business rates, which are set by central government and, as we know, payable to them. We are receiving pleas from our businesses for this support, which we need to be introduced on a national level. Our businesses are facing a very uncertain and stressful future here and now, and without government support, they are fearing potential collapse. We are all waiting for the government to act and to provide the long overdue response to the cost of living crisis that we all face. I will be presenting the affordable housing SPD later on in the agenda, so I'll reserve my comments on that for a bit later. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Just also, I think as one of the county councillors in the room, I imagine like me and probably Andy, you've been hearing about the number of schools also facing massive financial challenges due to the energy crisis in particular, and hospitals indeed. So something does need to happen and happen soon. And last but not least, Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you, Leader. And as a portfolio holder who's sometimes associated with bins, I'd quite like to add my congratulations to the new Prime Minister, whom I've noted was made Prime Minister as a result of fewer votes than Count Binface received in the London mayoral election, apparently. Clearly, I'm seriously worried in terms of the impact of what is a fairly extreme Prime Minister elected by a very, very small number of people on our economy, on our climate, on our communities, and as Councillor Townsend has just said, on the cost of living and the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing at the moment. However, moving on from that, not a lot to report in terms of environment and sustainability, but much work and many projects are ongoing, both in those key areas of waste and sustainability. Just a couple of things, really. Air Quality Steering Group has been reconvened and will meet next Tuesday. And we are trying to get the right people around the table who can make a difference to air quality and Waverley, and specifically the identified hotspots. The Carbon Neutrality Action Plan is being updated and refined in the light of the progress over the last 8 months, and a meeting of the Climate Emergency Board has been convened for the 5th of October. I would like to just take this opportunity to thank the members of the Climate Emergency Board for their thoughtful contributions, providing some valuable steerage on aspects of our response to the climate emergency, particularly in relation to recent discussions on the decarbonisation of our procurement services and our contracted services, including our waste fleet, with very much on its agenda at the present time decarbonisation of our buildings, including our housing stock. But as I say, the update of the climate emergency of our carbon neutrality action plan will be presented to the board at the meeting on the 5th of October. Thank you.
Thank you. And one final update from me, just to say that we've got the engagement events for the Central Godalming Regeneration project taking place over the course of this week, at the end of this week on Friday. And next week, we have some qualms about one of the venues that we're intending to use because of the rain, but officers are already working on some potential alternatives in collaboration with the Town Council. So hopefully we should be doing something on those days, if not entirely what we had planned. Right, on to the full agenda. Item 7, the Affordable Housing SPD, sorry, Affordable Homes SPD, which I will hand over to Councillor Townsend to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. I would like to present to the Executive the draft Affordable Housing Supplementary Planning document for publication for a public consultation. This has been brought about after many hours of hard work, from our officers, who are committed to delivering affordable housing across the borough in line with the direction from this administration. I would also like to highlight a small change to the public consultation dates outlined in the recommendation on the top of page 8 of your agenda. These dates have changed slightly, and they will now be from midday on the 17th of October to midday on the 28th of November. So I'll re-stress that when I get to the end of this bit. This document, once adopted, will become a significant material consideration in the determination of planning applications and also on appeals. The updated document with the changes highlighted within your agenda is required due to this administration's commitment to lower rents outlined in our affordable homes delivery strategy, which we adopted in April 2022, as well as changes in national policy and the introduction of the government's First Homes scheme. As we know, social rents are the most affordable pathway into accommodation, charging the equivalent to around 55% of market rents for those on our lowest incomes. We have prioritised the need for building housing for social rent in our affordable homes delivery strategy. We recognise that what are termed affordable rents, set at 80% of market rates, can still be out of reach for many people. And that is why we are seeking to impose a Waverley rent cap of 70% of market rates on 1 to 3 bedroom properties and 65% on 3 to 4 bedroom properties. This is in line with needs evidence from the Waverley Housing Affordability Study, which was carried out last year, 2021. We, however, also need to include the government's First Homes scheme, which imposes a requirement that 25% of affordable homes delivered on a site must be comprised of first homes. We have little control over this scheme. However, there is some flexibility to introduce local eligibility criteria. The requirement for purchasers to have a local connection to Waverley is formalised in this SPD update, Supplementary Planning Document update. The requirement of first homes does unfortunately impact on the number of affordable rented properties, which, as I said, are the most affordable form of accommodation for many people that we can now deliver on sites. Previously, our guidelines required 70% of the affordable housing delivered on a site to be at a social affordable rent, and 30% intermediate housing like shared ownership schemes. Now, to accommodate this new government scheme, which is outlined on page 43 of your agenda, we now have to have 25% of affordable homes on site, that they need to be first homes. And in order to adhere to the government requirements for 10% of affordable home ownership across a site, we will need to reduce the delivery of social and affordable rents now to 60%. So previously we had 70%, now we'll be looking at reducing those to 60%. And with a further reduction in the shared ownership properties to 15%. Because of the government price limit on first homes as well, there's a cap on them to a purchase price of £250,000, which is after the discount. This is also skewing the housing delivered under this scheme to a choice of 1 and 2 bedroom flats. This might be contrary to what the need in the area might be, and also it could impact on the character of areas as well. However, as I said, we have little control over this scheme. Within the SPD, we have outlined that if developers seek to alter the quantum of affordable housing on site on financial viability grounds, in line with our strategy, this change will only be decided by councillors through an open and transparent committee process. The proposed full changes are outlined on page 10 of your agenda papers. We remain keen to ensure that where we have influence, that homes are as affordable as they can be in relation to local incomes. And this is demonstrated in the measure within this SPD, such as the priority we are putting on social rents and our recommended rental price caps. I hope that members will be able to support the recommendation outlined at the top of page 8, noting again the change in consultation dates. These will now be from midday on the 17th of October to midday on the 28th of November. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Before I ask Councillor Hyman, who's registered to speak, to do so, I think it's just worth again outlining the frustration that many of us have felt over the government's definition of affordable for many, many years, which obviously we're trying to do something about here. But it was my distinct hope that the fairly pathetic first homes policy would at least not do anything negative, even if it wasn't going to do anything positive. But it's clear that actually it's going to have a negative impact in terms of the numbers of genuinely affordable and social housing we can actually deliver, which again is a regressive step from this government that I hope they will think about going forward. Certainly, I can assure the head of housing that the frustration is shared by many people on the executive and other members too. Councillor Hyman, you've registered to speak, so I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I do support what we're trying to do here, and thank the officers for all the work on this. And the first homes is a bit of a spanner in the works, but nevertheless, this is going to be more important, obviously, as viability issues and whatever start hitting the market. And I think everybody's pleased that we've got viability issues going forward to the committee. So I just want to talk about strengthening paras 34 and 67, 68. So on page 33 of your papers, Leader, it says if the council has evidence of the planning obligations not being complied with, the council will consider the need to investigate these further and whether enforcement action should be taken if other measures fail to rectify the situation. I just think that we've got a portfolio holder for enforcement. If obligations are not being complied with, we should be strong on that, and I would far prefer it if members would be kind enough to consider changing it to a phrase that says something like Waverley would always seek to enforce, something which shows that actually, because 34 at the moment sounds like try it on, you'll probably get away with it, and I don't think that's a message that we want to get across. 67 and 68, which paragraph 67 and 68, which are on page 43, it's about expectations. I just think that those could be tightened up a bit, but as this will probably be coming back for changes in the future, perhaps they can wait, but I would like to, I should have flagged those up earlier. I really think that those should be strengthened a little bit as well. They could be, so that's just a note for the future. I did in my email with notice to speak mention that paragraphs 30 and 60 mention that section 106 will have to include definitions of affordable housing, and 60 particularly mentions to allow flexibility. So I'd like you to explain to me and residents in the committee how what that flexibility is. Ensure that planning committees are able to know exactly what flexibility they're consenting to, because generally the committee doesn't look at section 106 agreements and they're not signed and completed fully by the time things go before the committee. So how can we know about the flexibility that's mentioned in paragraph 60? We've also got, I don't want to go through all of the typos and bits and pieces that I've noticed, but if you look at, I think paragraph 56 was the first one, which is a little table on page 40. You'll see in the second box down, it says 60% of the 35 affordable houses, whereas the result, if you look top right of that, it's actually 30, and 60% of 35 isn't 18 anyway. So we don't want all respondents having to waste their time telling us that we've got our maths wrong there. If we can change that, and there was another one. I think it was if we go to 74, I think was the other one. Is a bit of a jumble. Paragraph 74 on page 44, Leader. It gives the criteria and says, I mean, you can see that they're set out separately and not necessarily as criteria. They can be reworded. There's a few typos in the wording of it, but particularly in C, it repeats reflecting the housing allocation policy. It says that twice in there. We don't need to say that. And D says it could do with rewording. So I would request that you put in place just the standard, in addition to changing the dates, that you put into place the standard delegation to the head of planning and the portfolio holders just to agree before we go out. There's absolutely no point in leaving things in there. I'm happy to run through the others privately with you if you want to know with other typos I've found. We don't want respondents to have to tell us we've got typos in it, and we don't want them to carry on forever, as they often do in some of our documents. But thanks very much for that. If you can, please, guys, just and I'll have a look at paragraph 34, and Councillor MacLeod's there with you in respect of enforcement. And
wrap it up, Jerry. You've gone over time.
Yeah, that's it. I'm done on that one. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I'll respond to a couple of bits of those. I'm more than happy to add the delegation in to modify any typos, and if you're happy to supply the portfolio holders, the head of housing and the head of planning, with your list of typos and other issues with it, I'm sure that will be corrected before the consultation. I'm happy to agree with you, assuming the portfolio holder for enforcement does too. I completely agree with your suggestion regarding strengthening the planning section in paragraph 33. We should always seek to enforce where there's an issue, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. And Councillor MacLeod, are you content with that? Thank you. In which case, I will add a second recommendation to delegate to relevant officers and portfolio holders to make those minor changes. Any other speakers from the rest of the executive? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. I was just going to say that obviously there will be a public consultation, and Councillor Hyman, thank you for his comments, but he's quite welcome to make obviously any suggestions within that public consultation as well, regarding any points which can then be taken into account in the round with all other responses as well. Thank you, Leader.
Any other comments? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, the purpose of an SPD is to push us as far as we possibly can in a certain direction, and I think this SPD very successfully does that, and is as a result of a lot of work from the portfolio holder and a whole series of officers across the council, including housing. As well. So again, I'm very happy to support that.
Right, thank you, members. Okay, and in which case I'll move to the recommendations. The first recommendation is that we delegate authority to clear up any typos and to adjust the planning paragraph accordingly to the relevant officers and also to the portfolio holders, which in this case are Councillor Townsend and Councillor Nick Palmer. All those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. And then to the amended second recommendation. So it is recommended that the executive approves the draft affordable housing supplementary planning document update to be published for public consultation between midday 17/10/22 and to midday 28/11/22. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. Item 8, the report of the ONS Task and Finish Group on housing allocations. Councillor Paul Rivers to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, thank you to the ONS Working Group for their truly comprehensive work to review our housing allocation policy. In summary, the housing allocation scheme sets out the eligibility criteria of who can access social housing throughout our borough. Social housing is a scarce resource, so it has to be allocated on a needs basis. There are 1,100 or so registered applications and 300 homes approximately let every year. The Task and Finish group reviewed, had input and reviewed new information following our Attitudes to Council Housing Pride or Prejudice Scrutiny Review from 2019. Data from Housing Operations Team and the Strategy and Enabling Team's Affordability and Housing Needs Study. So a lot of stuff from officers, and we thank them for that. The recommendations from the group are very straightforward. No change to financial thresholds, signposts to shared ownership schemes, no change to split family eligibility, to disregard council tax or housing benefit debt, and signposts to debt charities. I'm happy to support the group's recommendations to ensure we let homes in a fair, transparent and efficient way and provide appropriate support and signposting. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers, and also thank you to, I think it was Councillor George Wilson, who was the chair of that working group. Certainly when Councillor Townsend chaired the Pride and Prejudice working group, which now feels like an entire lifetime ago, back before the current administration existed, I think we were all quite surprised to find how many people weren't aware that 60,000 was the threshold anyway. And I suspect if we'd lowered it, as I think the gut feeling for many of us would want to be, there wouldn't be houses to give them anyway, so it would be functionally pointless to do so. Councillor Hyman, you've registered to speak, so I'll hand over to you.
Got it. Thank you again, Leader. Yes, I did note that I wanted to request clarification or explanation of the recommendations, asking why, when and what, because the recommendations to the executive do differ from the recommendations to the that were made by the task and finish group, who obviously I'd like to thank for their work, and officers too. This is unfinished in some ways because recommendation 1 says within we're going to review it within 12 to 18 months, and that's the income capped levels. So the question is why aren't we doing that now? Why are we putting that off till the next administration? And I think we've got 2 issues in there, 2 recommendations which say that we're going to establish a process to signpost applicants. The first one to for people who are unable to join the register due to the income and savings threshold, and the last one on recommendation 5 is to establish a process by which the team cite and post applicants to join if unable to join the needs register due to debts to local debt, refer them to local debt advice charities, not debts to local charities. But when is the question on those really? Because I think, you know, just to say one day we're going to do that, I don't think really is good enough as a recommendation. If you can add to those onto the end, consider adding onto the end, executive, if you would, to bring them forward by a certain date to the executive, whether it's 6 months, 3 months or whatever. I can imagine that you probably wouldn't want to do it within this administration, but nevertheless, I think we should have dates on when we're going to do that by, otherwise we're not really doing it. So it's we've got. I'm not happy with recommendation 3. I don't think many people would be, that we're not able to. We really don't have the capacity to be able to accommodate children in 2 homes. I assume that means that if children are accommodated in rented private sector, then the other parent can have a spare bedroom to accommodate a child or children. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm not sure it matters entirely, because it says an exception will be made. So we're saying that we won't do this unless there's a court order in place, or if Surrey County Council's Children's Services or equivalent organisation provide compelling evidence that a second home is required. My concern there is that is very woolly. Different members of staff are likely to interpret that differently. So somebody might find that they were refused access to the to the register or to a home, where and that after a change of staff, actually they would be able to gain access. And we want solid criteria, I think, so everybody knows where they stand. I think that has to be tightened up, or at least a definition to be provided of what compelling evidence is, because that's all someone has to do, and we don't want this to to put an advantage to dishonest people who fiddle the system and can get a compelling, you know, get someone to write a compelling letter, whatever the definition is of compelling. You know, rather than people who are perhaps more deserving but want to be honest with the councils, and we must have a system that rewards good behaviour, not punishes it. So we need definitions for recommendation 3, I'm quite sure, in terms of what this compelling evidence is, so that people know what the rules are. Otherwise, people really don't know whether it's worth them trying and going through and you know, having to try and jump through the hoops. I do accept that the changes made to recommendation 4 are because the private sector, but housing related debts to private.
Can you wrap it up, Jerry? You've just hit your 4 minutes.
Housing related debts to private sector landlords is currently under review. Why is the question on that one? What work remains to be done in respect of that, and why can't we tie that one up now instead of again putting that off? So I say it's unfinished in 2 or 3 respects there, with the whens and the whys and whatever. If you could just tie those up for us, and the definition that goes with recommendation 3, compelling evidence, I think is absolutely necessary. But let members have a look at that, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I think just on item 1, I think what they did in their task and finish group was review the thresholds and decided that they didn't think it needed to be done this time. And a date has been put on to have to do it again within 12 to 18 months. A date I agree with, because clearly things in the economy are likely to have altered significantly in that point, and it probably needs a review again. They have just done one as part of this review, so I think that's an entirely valid thing for them to suggest. Just probably to say, probably don't need to say this, but the depth and breadth I wish we could do more than we are able to do is probably not something I can go into briefly right now. It's if we had more capacity, more money, more support from government, better legislation to actually do this, etc., etc. This is us doing what we can, frankly, in a system that wishes to effectively squeeze social housing as hard as it can, frankly. So I'm quite content with these recommendations. And in terms of compelling evidence, I will just look to officers. Compelling evidence is a judgment, usually with these things. But if I can ask Andrew Smith, if he wouldn't mind comment on compelling evidence.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Just a couple of points before I come to that. I think that Councillor Hyman understandably said what are the timescales. So once these recommendations have been approved, then we will ask a barrister to check through the revised allocations policy, and it is a council document. It will need to be approved by full council. So that is the timescale for that. It's in the middle of a process. In terms of the bedrooms for children, we debated that long and hard. The group were very engaged in that. We don't have, as Councillor Follow said, the capacity to give a bedroom to a parent where a child may come every other weekend. The compelling evidence on that is very similar to where we're asking for compelling medical evidence. There is a judgment call to be made on this. And although the allocations policy will be as tight and clear as it possibly can, I often have to make that particular judgment call when asked to increase a banding to move somebody from an area or where there's extensive ASB, if there's compelling evidence, even if that person may be committing the ASB. We don't want to reward bad behaviour, but sometimes for the good of the community and the good of local families, we make a judgment call. So on this particular issue, the compelling evidence, then we will have to make that particular judgment call. We will look and see if we can give examples in the allocations policy, if that would help clarify the issue. Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
And thank you, Andrew. I think that would help, actually, having some sorts of a number of case studies just to show the sorts of flexibility and judgment that are used and why they're sometimes used in that way. I think it's probably also just worth me saying, I have no doubt that with the support housing officers and Councillor Wilson, it is likely you had the sorts of debates on what we can possibly do in that group. Any other speakers on this subject? No, in which case I shall move to the recommendations. I'm not going to read all of those very lengthy recommendations, so we will get out of here at some point today. If people are content to take recommendations 1 through 5 together, can I have all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, everyone. Item 9, one I've been looking forward to for a little while, update on the Museum of Farnham Mend application, handing over to Councillor Mirrlees.
Really? Right. Okay. Thank you, Leader.
Not as much as some, I might add.
Well, we're doing all right, to be perfectly honest. I think we're really pleased that we've managed to get through the first round of the MEND funding. And that in itself has required an enormous amount of time, technical know-how from Drake and Cannemeyer, and also the officers who've been involved, Charlotte and Kelvin. So, yeah, it's not an easy one at all. What we have got now to do is to get our match funding in place for the 683,000 that we would be requiring in order to go forward. There are things that will come after that, but I don't think we need to look at that now. We need to get a commitment to supporting this. And when we get into the second round and they say, yep, you can have the money, we will be there for continuing, which we are now doing all the time, is looking for other bodies that are interested to match fund and help us get there. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all going in the right direction. It is very complicated. It's not an easy one. And I think the procurement problems, all that will come later, but it's all dependent on whether or not this second round is one that we can get through and they say, yes, we're interested and we can see that you're committed to it. And it's very important that they know that we are looking for match funding, that we are putting in money ourselves, which we are, and that we are committed to making this work. So yes, positive. The recommendations, I do, Leader, have a thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mirrlees, and thank you and Councillor Merriweather also, and the team for a massive amount of positive progress on this. I mean, I think a number of times we've looked at this as one of those unsolvable Gordian knots. Certainly we were told so by our predecessors a number of times that this was an unsolvable problem, which as far as I'm concerned just makes it a challenge for us, which I think you've done just fantastic work getting it to this point, and so have the team. I've got Councillor Hyman registered to speak before I move on to anybody else. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, Councillor Mirrlees and I were at a meeting at this in the garden room at the museum back in, I think it was 5 years ago, something like that. So it's absolutely great to see that we're getting somewhere. So thanks for all the efforts that have been made. If the wheels have turned slowly, then I think that's just the way it is. We've had things happen in between, of course, slowing things down. We want to get rid of that scaffolding, and we want it sorted obviously before we do. So this is a move forwards, brilliant. But I'm a little bit confused by what it says in paragraph on page 106. I did mention in advance where it says that the museum working group are acting on the key interests declared by the parties involved in the discussion. This is in the early stages of development. That there is Greek to me, and probably would be. So it'd be nice if people who are following this are able to just know what that means. Presumably, it's something to do with the three key options, which I don't see really addressed in here. Whether we've gone past those and got here, or whether that's still to look at, I don't know. So just clarification on that. And of course, when you look at the recommendation on page 103. The last paragraph at the bottom of that page starts with a capital letter and shouldn't do, because it's a continuation of the however, if circumstances are such that we do get the 638,000 grant and blah blah the rest, then the executive supports a recommendation in principle. And I think we ought to know what that recommendation in principle, what the executive's saying that it supports, or whether that's something for the future and it's just an addition to the recommendation that doesn't mean a great deal to us, because obviously we'll be looking at that in future and deciding whether the executive does or doesn't support the match funding, if we needed to, for instance, chuck some more money into the pot or whatever, which we don't really want to perhaps talk about now. But nevertheless, that last paragraph there, I think might be removed if it's meaningless to us, or perhaps just explained or strengthened in some way, so we know what it is trying to say. Thanks very much.
Well, Kelvin and Paul both said that it's really effectively to do with the commitment that we have to show. If successful with the MEND application, Waverley will commit to the required match funding up to £200,000. This commitment needs to be formally approved to fulfill the funding requirements of the application. That's what we're trying to show, that we are committed to doing this. Other than that, I think I don't understand what you're talking about, but I got the last bit. Does that make sense to you, Jerry?
Councillor Hyman,
yes. When someone says they don't know what I'm talking about, I thoroughly understand that bit. Yes, but yes, I think I do. I think I do. We can't commit the executive cannot commit itself to anything further at the moment, I think is what is being said.
Yes, but we have to show commitment as it is, that we are prepared to do the things and we are doing them. Okay.
Yes, but yeah, good luck with it. Obviously, we fingers crossed. Thanks.
Let's bring this back to order then. Any other members of the executive wanting to speak on the subject? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. I would only urge, as we enter the fundraising period for the £100,000, that we're approaching some illustrious bodies like Farnham Town Council and others, that we do not allow contributions to these to this fund to have any conditions or strings attached to the contributions. Otherwise, the danger is that the running of the museum in the future could be hamstrung by all sorts of complex arrangements. So I would urge that. Thank you.
Completely agree. Any other speakers on the subject? I've been asked to amend line 3 of the section under however, if circumstances are such that, to change the text to every effort to obtain partnership funding from external sources is being explored and is ongoing. And members happy to accept that amendment before I move to the full recommendation. Thank you. In which case then the full recommendation, which in this case I will read, it is recommended that the executive agrees to the council committing £100,000 of capital funding as a partnership contribution to an overall match fund commitment of £200,000. However, if circumstances are such that 1, the council has awarded the full grant of £638,000 requested of MEND. 2, the legal and financial terms and conditions of grant are agreeable to the council. And 3, every effort to obtain partnership funding from external sources is being explored and is ongoing. The executive supports a recommendation in principle to the council to make up the match funding shortfall based on a value for money appraisal and the identification of an available budget to enable the project to proceed to the construction phase. So in other words, is it value for money and can we actually afford it from some budget? I think that translates to, for anybody missing that one. All those in favour of the recommendation? Thank you, as we slowly untie that Gordian knot. So thank you all very much. Item 10, Brightwells yard update. Councillor MacLeod to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. Members of the executive will remember that we've been through a similar earlier version of this item. Just to repeat what we're doing here, we're being asked to approve a deed of easement between Waverley Borough Council, Crest Nicholson and BTR Farnham Limited. And we'd be asked to approve updates to the head lease plan to provide an as-built position in relation to the Brightwells Yard Farnham scheme. The purpose of this, doing this, is to enable the development to progress towards practical completion in accordance with the development agreement as residential units are sold and commercial leases signed. There's been, this is a pretty tricky thing to do. It sounds simple, but it's required the expertise of quite a number of our senior officers, including Graham Clark, Strategic Director, Peter Vickers as Head of Finance, Georgina Parker from Legal Services, Kevin Mills, Head of Commercial Services, and it's been coordinated by Debbie Smith, Programme Development Manager for the Brightwells development. So that's it really. It's a simple, it's a complicated technical matter, which seems simple. And we're being asked to approve what I said at the beginning. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. I've got Councillor Hyman registered to speak, so I shall hand over to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, again, I did mention this in advance and outline. My concern here, first concern, is that it's got pink papers and I can't understand what would be prejudiced in any way if this was not in on pink papers, if this was open, because a lot of the things, I mean, the last 2 pages, with, you know, I appreciate we're in exempt, the last 2 pages are just plans, and the heading on page 124 is wrong. It should say surrendered from rather than to. That's about these have been open for a long time. I don't think the list, I saw something in planning, go through planning, which told us most of what's going on here, tells the public. So I don't think anything in this, except perhaps the amount of money involved, which is totally uncontroversial. I'm not sure there's any reason for this to be an exempt. So if someone could explain what would be prejudiced if this was to be open, and open it up if you can do. I mentioned that I would like to know when residents, also because this item is headed as an update, when residents can expect the awaited corresponding planning applications to regularise the revised Dogford access arrangements, which are shown in Appendix 2. 2009, I pointed out to the council that the plans had changed, and it's now taken 13 full years. for the council to admit that they've got it wrong if this is an admission. And 13 years later, we've had 13 years of planning applications going through with the wrong master plan every single time. I've mentioned it. At last, this is being regularised, but the planning application still hasn't come forward. And I've asked the portfolio holder about this many times over the past few years. Also, planning applications that we're awaiting in respect of revised transport, drainage mitigation, possible removal of green roofs for in favour of solar panels, which is part of the drainage strategy, additional flood risk compensation for the raising of land levels, maintenance proposals for the green space, which now appears to be not under lease to Crest Nicholson. So it's probably ours now. Changes to the Section 106 and Section 278 agreements for the traffic proposals and other reasons. Anything we can know perhaps about changes to the loading bay and Brightwells Road, which probably doesn't need to be massively wide if we haven't got someone like M&S Food in there. We've got a loading bay and a much wider Brightwells Road access from South Street, which perhaps we don't really need. So have we got changes coming through? Removal of the cafe seating possibly as well that's been granted. So all these planning applications need to come through to regularise it in the way that this is regularising the leasehold and easement situation, which I support, I think. Why is it pink? Is there anything that officers should tell us that is controversial about this from the advice we're receiving? Because to me it looks fairly straightforward. It's being presented as being straightforward and nothing controversial, nothing to think about. Is that the case, that or is there a decision actually that the executive should really be thinking about carefully in terms of whether the easement should be granted there? Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Just a couple of things. Its level of controversialness, if that's a word, controversiality, is relatively immaterial to the distinction of whether it's exempt or not. In this case, it's commercially sensitive. And if I were to go into why it's commercially sensitive without going into exempt, I would be breaking that exemption. So I'm not going to do that. It is commercially sensitive. I agree it's not particularly controversial, but because it hits that test of commercial sensitivity, it's an exempt. That being said, this is one of those relatively complex Brightwells matters, which the executive has been through separately. And I think we now at the point we actually understand these now. We've done several of them of a similar nature. The other points you've raised, which I believe, if I'm interpreting this correctly, are actually variations to conditions on Brightwells related planning applications rather than new applications or, if I get the language right, non-material amendments or even material ones of any detail. I imagine that Graham Clark and the portfolio holder for planning can discuss those conditions revisions with you. I don't believe though, and I'm just looking at Liz and Graham, that there are any planning applications for Brightwells in the pipeline coming up. And Councillor MacLeod, sorry.
Yeah, I can answer, I think, Jerry's questions. In terms of his concern about, I was first point about the pink papers and the exempt information. Debbie did seek an answer from the legal department, which I can read out, so I'll read that out. The relevant appendices relate to the detail of the commercial transactions. It is the detail rather than the principle which is commercially confidential, and this is not directly related to the planning applications. Indeed, executive decisions do not bind the planning process. The relevant exemption will be, as indicated, Section 3 of Schedule 12.A, which relates to the commercial interests of the council and to the third parties. So that's an answer, Jerry, from our legal department. In terms of all the other questions you asked, I mean, technically we don't need to answer them at all because the actual update that you referred to was an update on the item that I've just mentioned. It's not actually an update in the whole Brightwells scheme, but to try to be helpful, I will answer your questions anyway, or try to. In terms of a general statement to be made about your questions, they all relate to planning applications, and planning applications aren't really a matter for the executive. It's not up to, we are not the applicant here. The applicant is Crest Nicholson. It's up to them to submit planning applications, and it's up to Waverley as a planning authority to answer them. And that's what needs to happen. To take some comments on the individual things you asked, think like changes to loading bay in D20. That's entirely a matter for Chris Nicholson. We are not builders as Waverley. That's a matter for Chris to make an application to Waverley as the planning authority, and for the planning authority to answer it. And much the same applies to the other two things that you asked us about. But in terms of being helpful, we will tell you about things we know about. For example, in terms of your second question, planning has been approved for a landscaping scheme and the open service maintenance plan under the terms of the conditions in the section 106 agreement. But again, as I say, we're only telling you that really because we've got people like Debbie Smith working with Chris Nicholson all the time. But as I say, do remember that we are not the applicant, we're actually the landholder. We've got a development agreement with Chris to develop the scheme on our site. But it's up to Chris to make the applications, and that's up to Waverley in a quite separate hat as the planning authority to approve them or not approve them. So that's the answer to all these other questions, Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. I think it's probably fair to say if the executive did have binding powers over planning, we'd have been tempted to use them at least once before now. So on that note, the recommendation, it is recommended that the executive approves the grant of the proposed deed of easement between the council, Crest and BTR Farnham Limited as set out in Annex 1, and that the strategic director is delegated to be able to agree easements on similar terms for those individual properties that request it and Thames Valley Metropolitan Housing. I just confirm Thames Valley Metropolitan Housing is Surrey County Council's housing vehicle. Is that correct?
That's not correct, leader. No, they're a separate housing association.
That's a separate housing association.
They
right?
bought the affordable units in the Brightwells scheme.
Thank you. Just wanted to be sure of that before I moved on. And finally, approves the updates to the head lease plan as set out in Annex 2. Can I have those in favour of those 2 points? Thank you. Item 11, exclusion of press and public. There are no reasons to go into exempt this evening. So 12, there are no other matters, in which case I can close the meeting at 7:05. Thank you.